I'm here to listen. Why am I walking on this way?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Muse's AT Podcast, where you can relive my epic journey with me. This is Muse, and what follows is my Appalachian Trail story. Today's episode covers Sunday, June 22nd, 2025. This would be the day that I would ultimately leave Shawls and the town of Monson behind me. When we left off last episode, I'd finished that Saturday pretty sick and missing the solstice party, which was also the 10-year anniversary celebration for Hippie Chicks and Poets' ownership of the hostel. It's funny how many of the 2025 southbound crew coincided at Shawls for this party, including Ratatouille and Shotgun, who I wouldn't then meet for another 5.5 weeks later at the Notch Hostel when almost complete with the White Mountains in New Hampshire. Because I missed the party, I missed them as well as many others there that night at Shawls. As we get ready to hear about my first steps out of Monson, let's do today's haiku. This one is from January 3rd, 2024. Eyes facing forward. Focus on greater purpose. Live for fruition. A while back, I started this practice of describing the pictures. And I had said at the time that I started that practice because I saw an entry coming where I just absolutely had to describe the picture, or you would have no idea what was going on when I started reading the entry. And I think that's been good anyway. I think it's been fun to kind of describe the pictures, kind of leads me into the entry. In any case, this is that entry. So what I'm looking at here is a picture, and this picture is taken as I got to an intersection along the road. And as we get in the entry, and you probably already know anyway why I was on the road, but I got to an intersection right outside a town called Blanchard, Maine, which is right near Monson, maybe a couple miles outside Monson. This sign lists the following things in varying colors down the sign. It says cheese, goat soap, fresh milk, gifts, and then it's got an arrow pointing, as I'm looking at the picture, to the left 1 mile. So the sign's indicating that a mile away I could get cheese, fresh milk, gifts, and something called goat soap, which of course led to the title and the first 2 sentences of the entry. We'll do a little bit more about that in the commentary, but for now, on with that entry. June 22nd, 2025. Goat soap. Start, Shawls Hiker Hostel, Monson, Maine. End, Moxie Bald Mountain Pond Lean-To. Miles, 14.6. Yeah, I have no idea. I guess if I ever have a goat that needs a bath, I know where to go. Great day. Met a few people on the first 3 miles. First, a Nobo whose name I did not catch. Then I ran into Guitar Hero and Shayla on their way back to Monson, Sobos like me who I had met at Shawls. They were slack packing today and talking about heading out of Monson. Not sure I completely get it, but that's what they were doing. Then I met Rabbit, another Nobo, who immediately started being helpful about the river fordings ahead. I told him my plan was to do some road walking to bypass on the advice of Poet. Rabbit confirmed that the rivers were rough. If I was given a reroute, I should take it. And so I did. The past 2 days after the thunderstorms, Thursday into Friday, the hostel had been inundated with calls from hikers needing a pickup after having to find strange ways around rivers or being rescued. My reroute was just barely past where I was talking to Rabbit. I met the road and proceeded 7.3 miles before rejoining the trail. Along the way, I met a group of 4 coming the other way, also bypassing the rivers. When not enjoying a hike themselves, they were part of a rescue crew and wondered how many callouts they have missed over the past couple days. Nice folks. I rejoined the trail at a perfect tenting spot, but it was only 3 in the afternoon, so looked up how far to the next shelter. 5 miles, not unreasonable. I had a little adventure in those 5 miles. About 1.5 in, I slipped on a rock, sending my feet into the water, and my butt came down hard where my feet had just been. Ouch. I probably have a pretty good bruise, but I kept hiking, so it can't be too bad. Then another 1.5, I discovered that I did have to ford Bald Mountain Stream, even though my bypass took me past both branches of the Piscataquis River. It was rushing pretty hard, so I took my time figuring out exactly how I wanted to attack it. I found a place where it was pretty shallow most of the way, almost like a sandbar, and the current wasn't so hard there. It was kind of tough to get to, but I made my way there and started across. About halfway into the river, it was still pretty shallow, but it started getting deeper. I just went slow and steady and did just fine, but at its deepest, it was almost up to my armpits. I'm pretty sure this was supposed to be the easy one, so I'm certain bypassing the others was the right call. Wildlife update. On the road walk today, I saw 2 deer. That's 3 total for me, oddly, all while walking roads. The other was on Friday, when walking with Haley from the trailhead back into Monson. Haley saw 2 deer while we were in the 100, but I had missed both of those. Also, I saw a large bird, could well have been an eagle. It was really cool because I never saw it flap its wings, it was just riding the air currents. I stopped to watch it for a few seconds. Did not get a picture, sorry John. No moose sightings yet, but that is almost crazy given the number of tracks I've seen, not to mention having to step over droppings seemingly every 100 feet or so. Lastly, back in the 100, I saw a notable amount of beaver activity. It was pretty cool coming across chewed off trunks or logs. I may have even seen a beaver. There was a very fast, large rodent that scurried past me while I was fording a stream back in the 100. Makes me want to give a shout out to the old Cub Scout family. Hi guys. All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear from the sponsors who help keep Muse's AT podcast on the trail. These are offerings that truly enhanced my thru-hike experience, so I'd really like you to check them out. Please look for and follow the links in the show notes to this episode. Looking forward to that lazy day on the couch, knocking down your Netflix queue and wondering what to wear? Quick answer, wear something else. Summit Ready Apparel is clothing built for those who scramble over jagged rocks, reach the peaks, and actually enjoy getting caught in a torrential downpour. If you're someone who doesn't mind the elements and has the grit to crush the next segment anyway, look no further than Summit Ready to match your restless trail spirit. Check out the catalog at summitreadyapparel.com and get ready for your next adventure. That's summitreadyapparel.com. Looking for your next great trail read? Walk Uphill is a powerful story about leaving the emptiness of modern corporate life behind and finding a completely new beginning on the Appalachian Trail. It's about discovering what life can look like when you embrace freedom, lighten your load, and take it step by relentless step. I actually read this book myself during a couple rest days in Gorham, New Hampshire, right after conquering the brutal terrain of southern Maine. I literally couldn't put it down. I read it from cover to cover in 2 days. The book chronicles the real-life events of the author, Bounce the Hiker, in a twisty, shocking, edge-of-your-seat story that even the most imaginative fiction writer couldn't make up. Just a quick content warning, there is definitely adult material in this book, so I wouldn't recommend buying it for your 10-year-old's birthday. But if you're looking for a gripping, raw trail adventure, I highly recommend Walk Uphill by Bounce the Hiker. You can find it easily on Amazon by searching Walk Uphill Book, or just click the direct link in the show notes of this episode. All right, a lot going on in this entry. It was a good entry. I was quite entertained by it, actually. I hope you were as well. First, let's go ahead and put any questions to bed about the goat soap. I went ahead and typed this in to my often assistant, and here is actually what Gemini told me. That sign is a great snapshot of local trail town geography. That arrow is directing you to Misty Mountain Farm, located just about a mile down Mountain Road in Blanchard. It's a small family-run homestead that sells fresh dairy, eggs, and handmade farm goods right from their farm store. As for the mystery on the sign, what is goat soap? Goat soap is shorthand for goat's milk soap. Because writing out a full name on a wooden directional sign gets cramped, homesteaders usually just truncate it. Instead of being made entirely with water like mass-produced commercial soaps, it is handcrafted using fresh, raw milk right from the farm's dairy goats. It's incredibly popular in rural communities and among hikers for a few reasons. Insane moisturizing. Goat's milk contains high amounts of natural fats and creams. When turned into soap, it leaves the skin's natural moisture barrier intact rather than stripping it away. Gentle exfoliation. The milk is packed with alpha hydroxy acids, specifically lactic acid, which gently break down dead skin cells without harsh scrubbing. Skin food. It's naturally loaded with vitamin A and selenium, making it a godsend for anyone dealing with raw, dry, or wind-chapped skin from being out in the elements. It's essentially a classic, deeply nourishing, old-school batch of homestead soap. It definitely beats using a bar of hotel soap or industrial detergent after a long stretch in the woods. Okay, so mystery solved, goat soap, and it sounds like great stuff. We need to get ourselves some. Back to some other elements of the entry. So first of all, here is our new high mileage day, 14.6. I had mentioned a while back I would do this whenever I exceeded the last record that I had had, which at this point, the record had been 13.4 getting into the 100-mile wilderness with Haley back on June 7th. Now we're on June 22nd, and the new record is 14.6. And this is one of those areas where actually, I still do just the trail miles that were covered. The reality is that I probably hiked about 17 miles this day. I tried to track it on my Garmin. I actually was hiking the whole time with my Garmin 265 Forerunner on my wrist, which could come in really handy at certain times because there were times that I really couldn't feasibly use the phone, mainly because of rain. That wasn't the case on this day, but it was also because I was off trail so much of the day, it was difficult to track mileage. I was still curious as to whether I was adding more miles or not getting quite as many miles, and I know that I exceeded on this day, and I thought it was a good 2.5 miles more, so that's where I say I probably walked a good 17, but I got 14.6 in trail miles. The next thing that comes up in this journal entry, and I think this is hilarious because I would end up doing this multiple times on my hike, but the first time I ever encountered it was Guitar Hero and Shayla Kiddo on their way back into Monson. They were knocking out some miles south of Monson, but they were heading northbound. And I do remember, and I kind of made a reference to it here in the entry, that I was confused by that. I didn't really understand why they were going northbound back to Monson, and yet they had chipped away at the miles south of Monson. And that's a fairly common thing to do, actually, when you're slack packing. We talked about slack packing before, that you're working with a pack that doesn't have all of your gear in it. You can generally cover a few more miles because you're just lighter that day. So what they would have done this day, and as I mentioned, you'll catch later in my trip that I caught on to this, and I did this a couple times as well. But what they would have done is they would have gotten a ride to somewhere down trail, and they would have just left all their gear at Shaw's. So then they walked basically back to Shaw's and covered those miles. They would then get that same shuttle to the spot where they started the next day, and they would continue south. Most likely. I don't know exactly what they did, but that would be often what you would do because you now had already covered the miles between those 2 points on your slack pack day when you were headed north. This entry also does a good recap of the last couple days into town, actually probably leading up to when we left the first time, the thunderstorms, and also Poet giving me that reroute. And it makes some sense here, and I'd forgotten this detail until this entry, but it makes some sense here that I was questioning whether the reroute still kind of applied to me, because I would have gotten that advice on Friday and not applied it until Sunday. I do remember that I was leaning heavily towards going ahead and doing that anyway, but I was probably weighing whether that was, I don't know, the right thing to do or whether it was necessary. So it was probably good that I ran into that guy Rabbit, and he was like, yes, you still need to do the reroute. So after 3 miles of hiking on the trail, I then took to the road as Poet had advised. And I remember running into those 4 folks. I guess they were rescue workers. I was trying to remember what they were, but then it was in the entry, which that's nice. So they were a bunch of rescue workers, and they were just awesome. They were a lot of fun to talk to. Talked to them for a couple minutes, advised them on how far they were going to the next road, because at that point, I'd been tracking it on my Garmin, so I knew how far that was away. And it's funny, I think I was only tracking it for the purpose of writing this entry, now that I think about it, because I wanted to say how far I was going on these different segments. So then I rejoined the trail. I do remember that perfect camping spot. In fact, I think that's going to be where Frogger, Spicy, and Ribbit all stayed that night. And the reason I know that is because I ran into Frogger the next day, and we were talking in the shelter, back when he gave me cheese. And I remember hanging out a little bit that morning, and I remember Frogger saying to Poet that he was going to wait for the later van because he wanted to wait for Spicy and Ribbit. So they would have left Monson the same day I did, but a little bit later in the day. Not exactly sure what time, but it would have been a little bit later. Ultimately, I remember that they were working to get the vans together and everything, and the vans were headed back out to Route 3, where Haley and I were initially picked up on that previous Tuesday. I didn't need to go to Route 3. That would have added the 3 miles that I'd already done. And so while I was hanging out a little bit, I always had it in my head that I was just going to walk out. So ultimately, that's what I did. I settled up first. So I went into the gear emporium. I talked to Hippie Chick for a little while. And then I said, see ya, I'm going to go ahead and go. I don't actually need a shuttle. I'm just going to walk out the same way Haley and I walked back in a couple days ago. I went backwards a little bit there. So that was first thing in the morning. Obviously, I did then the things I was just talking about. Ultimately came to that spot on trail where the road went back right into the trail. There was that campsite, but I kept on going 5 more miles. And that campsite, as I mentioned, would be where Frogger, Spicy, and Ribbit all stayed. I'm going to guess probably Fuego too, but I don't really know. I don't really know where she was. I wasn't actually aware of her until I would then meet her the next day, but she had to be somewhere in the area. And so that's a nice segue into introducing what I'm calling the Caratunk crew. Everybody but one of these people would end up eating breakfast together at the Sterling Inn in Caratunk in a couple of days before most of us would then head out across the Kennebec. I say all but one because Frogger was out ahead of us at this point. So I'll talk about Frogger first. And this is pretty good because this will end up being the order in which I meet them on trail from this point after this day. Before we go there, quick summary of the rest of the day. You already heard it. The entry was great for this. 5 more miles, slipped on a rock, had to cross the deepest ford that I ever did on trail, and then ultimately stayed at Moxie Bald Mountain Pond Lean-To. Where I would then meet Frogger would be the next shelter after Moxie Bald Mountain Pond Lean-To. And I guess I might have eaten a little bit of lunch. I probably would have. I mean, why wouldn't I have? And then I was listening to a meditation. I was just doing my normal timer, right? So it wasn't a guided meditation. It was just a timer that was on when Frogger came up. And he was coming into the shelter to stretch. Now, he has, of course, started the day 5 miles behind me. So I actually think, now Frogger's faster than me anyway, but I actually think I was there for a good hour and I was just about to move on when Frogger came up. But then it was good company. So I ended up staying there another half an hour and then left him there. He probably stayed there longer. And he was on a mission at this point. So Frogger, kind of by way of introduction, I had seen him at Shaw's. I had kind of interacted a little bit, but this was during the whole confusion of we came back into town. I don't think Frogger was there before we left town. I think he was there when we got back into town or maybe there that day. And I think this is maybe all true of Spicy and Ribbit as well. And so they might have taken their 0 day on Saturday, but then again, that was the day that I was variably either on my way or back from Bangor or in a bed with some stomach issues. So I really didn't talk to anybody on Saturday as it came down to. So this time on Sunday, that's the first time I really talked to Frogger. Cool guy. Gave me some cheese. You heard about that during the Trail Days episode, that his mom started thinking about sending him cheese and he had to put a stop to it because the cheese didn't really work too well through the mail. But the cheese was good. It was some German cheese with some real spice to it and stuff like that. It was a fun conversation piece. But then we talked for a while. Like I said, I guess I was there for another half an hour before I moved on. And Frogger at that point was on a mission because he was meeting friends in New Hampshire. I do know when the rest of us, and this would be Spicy, Ribbit, and Fuego and myself, stopped in the Sterling Inn in Caratunk, he would actually have gotten just to the other side of the Kennebec, which the Kennebec is the big river on the trail south side of Caratunk. Then the next person I would meet would be Fuego, and she didn't have a trail name yet. I didn't have a trail name yet either at this point in time, but this would actually be the next day. So Monday the 23rd, I would be in camp already. I remember I camped under these power lines. A little bit more about that in next episode because that's obviously happening next episode. But I was camping near these power lines, not under the power lines, but near the power lines. There was this patch where you could actually find some pretty good campsites. Terrible bear hangs, as we'll get into next episode. But then this lady comes up and she introduces herself as Michelle. Fuego's name was Michelle. She didn't have a trail name yet. She was Michelle. I was Joe. And Fuego was cool. She was a little more on the quieter side, but then you talk to her one-on-one. She's really cool. She had some sort of government job. I remember that. And this was during the time of a lot of the Doge stuff. And so she obviously had an opinion about that. And it was impacting her directly. I mean, it was beyond just an opinion. This was impacting her directly. And I remember that. But then also she was like I'll call it a little bit of an old school mentality of, you know what, I'm hiking. I've got to get at least my 15 miles, right? So that I'm going to guess, now I only hiked with her for a couple of days, but I'm going to guess that made her very consistent. And it made her very quickly get out in front of me, and I never caught up with her. But over these next couple of days at least, I would be pretty consistently with Fuego, Spicy, and Ribbit. Which brings us to Spicy and Ribbit. Spicy and Ribbit, married couple, had just gotten married the previous year. Ribbit had just gotten out of the military, so he had just retired from his military service. And Spicy also had a military background, but she was working as an ER nurse and had been working as an ER nurse for years at this point. I think her military background was a little further in the past. They had just gotten married the previous year, and they got married on McAfee Knob, which was pretty cool. I remember talking to them about that. And I would end up hiking with them all the way into the hostel of Maine. So we're talking about a week to a week and a half here. I would zero at the hostel of Maine. They would move on that day, and then I'd never catch them on trail. The other two people that I would put in my Caratunk crew then would be Kiddo and Hero. And as you heard in this entry, and as I described it later, because a year later I have my head wrapped around it, they would finish this day at Shaw's. But they would get a shuttle to, it might have been a little bit ahead of us, might have been behind us. Either way, I would come to be aware that they were at the Sterling Inn with us, and I don't remember, probably never knew whether they arrived before us or arrived after us. Doesn't really matter. Talked to them a little bit that Saturday night, ended up having breakfast with them that morning, but they were, I mentioned most of us crossed the Kennebec, they did not. At this point in time, Mateo Hero was actually done. This was the section that he was looking to do. He was looking to get to Caratunk, so he was taking a ride back. And then Shayla, Kiddo, who had been associated with the trail for years, was actually giving a talk. I didn't know where the talk was, but I always kind of imagined that it was Harper's Ferry. So she was taking a flight somewhere to hike into Harper's Ferry and give her talk, and then come back to Caratunk to continue her through hike. So that is what I call the Caratunk crew. It's the people that were around me at that point in time. A lot of good company there. It is, just a review, Frogger, Fuego, Spicy, Ribbit, Kiddo, and Hero. And I think that's where I'm going to go ahead and leave this episode. Next episode, we'll dive a little bit into what it was like these first few days without Haley, because it was weird. Even this day that I was talking about was weird. I spent a lot of the day alone. I hit those 4 guys. Remember, I'm talking about tomorrow when I'm, kind of meeting Frogger and I'm meeting Fuego. It was on this day, I was alone most of the time, and I hadn't been alone the whole journey at this point. So things are weird. We'll dive into that a little bit next episode, and we'll also just keep progressing towards the town of Caratunk. It's not far away. It's only, I think, 2 or 3 days from Monson. So we'll keep going that direction. Until then, this has been Muse, and you have been listening to Muse's AT Podcast. Don't forget that you can email me at museatpodcast@gmail.com or look me up on Instagram at Muse Hikes. Thank you for walking with me, and happy trails.
Here